1963, a year that would change the world. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Civil rights leader Medgar Evers killed in his own driveway. The March on Washington and throughout the South, nonviolent protests were met with savage beatings and arrest.
There was a lot of violence. You know, I was part of Freedom Summer in Mississippi in 1964, and there had been lots of people killed in Mississippi.
While violence raged across the South, in Atlanta, which described itself as a city too busy to hate, city leaders, black and white, took a different path.
They wanted to maintain peace. They didn't want to see a Birmingham, a Montgomery, a Selma. And I think that's what saved Atlanta and spared Atlanta. You didn't see the racial violence. You didn't see people using doors and fire hoses.
And throughout it all, one organization has stood as a fierce defender of civil liberties for Georgians. The American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia, better known as the ACLU of Georgia.
This group, the ACLU, seems to be probably one of the greatest contributors to the breakdown of constitutional government and the right to private property and free enterprise.
In the 60s, the Georgia legislature was dominated by rural counties and mostly older white men. They fought the one-man, one-vote principle established by the U.S. Supreme Court and lost.
The first time since Reconstruction, Atlanta had more representation and elected black members of the General Assembly.
I do not advocate that people should break laws.
When outspoken Vietnam War critic Julian Bond was denied his seat in the legislature and called a communist, the ACLU of Georgia fought back.
So that case went to the United States Supreme Court, and he ended up, of course, getting seated in the Georgia legislature.
During the 70s, the civil rights movement underwent change. Many prominent leaders believed that it was time to move from the movement into politics. So in 1970, Young ran as a Democrat for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, but was narrowly defeated. He contemplated running again. But in reapportionment, the legislature moved his neighborhood out of Atlanta's 5th district into a district with rural Noonan.
So it was 38% black in the old way. And when they put me with Noonan, it was like 16% black. It was the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia that took on that case and won it.
In 1972, Young ran again and won after the ACLU intervened.
Protect the vote! Protect the vote!
I've seen unfair maps play out in front of me when my dad, Andrew Young, was drawn out of the 5th Congressional District right here in Atlanta following the 1970 census.
Today, Georgia's legislative map-making is once again being challenged in federal court.
Under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the state of Georgia could have and should have drawn more districts, state house and state senate districts, that allowed black voters the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice.
Who would have ever thought that 50 plus years later we would still be fighting for the protection of voting rights and equal access to the ballot?
Along with voting rights, protecting women's reproductive rights has been a long-standing priority.
As you know, when Governor Kemp signed into law a bill violating women's constitutional rights in Georgia, we promised we would see him in court.
This was not the first time the ACLU of Georgia fought in court to protect women's reproductive rights. In 1973, Atlanta lawyer Margie Pitts Hames argued Doe v. Bolton, the Georgia companion case to Roe v. Wade, before the United States Supreme Court. Judge's 7-2 ruling gave women a constitutional right to abortion.
We're standing with you, the ACLU of Georgia. We stand with you in the fight against discrimination.
The ACLU of Georgia has been a relentless supporter of LGBTQ rights, fighting against discrimination, worked to secure legal protections, and advocated for equality in areas such as employment, public accommodations, and marriage.
As a lesbian woman who is married to a wonderful woman with 2 beautiful children, I wish I knew why people were so scared and terrified of us. We're no different than they are, and love is love.
For some, high school football is more than a game, it's a religion. In 1989, student Doug Jager filed a lawsuit to end a long-standing tradition of pregame football prayer practice in Douglas County. The ACLU supported his fight for the separation of church and state, ultimately leading to a court ruling that ended the unconstitutional prayer practice.
And he was a very gutsy guy because, there was a lot of opposition to what he was doing.
In 2017, the ACLU of Georgia played a significant role in challenging the Muslim ban, a series of executive orders issued by the Trump administration to restrict travel and immigration from several predominantly Muslim countries.
The airport worked with us and they set up rooms for attorneys to talk to these individuals who were coming in transit to give them legal advice to actually help.
The ACLU of Georgia chapter has come a long way since its modest beginnings in 1963.
Most recently, our work in voting rights, which ultimately led to the 2020 election when 5 million Georgians were able to vote.
From intervening in the Muslim ban to battling new and aggressive tactics and voter suppression, the ACLU of Georgia is steadfast in continuing its legacy of defending civil liberties, fighting for justice, and ensuring equal rights for all.
We have a number of tools at our disposal. I think it's one of the things that makes the current iteration of the ACLU so impactful.
We need the ACLU now more than ever because there's no other organization in the country that is committed to civil liberties and civil rights across the board.
We had a member in every one of Georgia's 159 counties, and as we like to say, a card-carrying member of the ACLU in every one of Georgia's 159 counties.
As the ACLU of Georgia looks to the future, their commitment to protecting civil liberties remains as strong as ever.
You deserve the right to be you. And I believe that is what the ACLU Georgia stands for.
I was trained in civil rights advocacy and citizenship at one of the citizenship schools that were developed to train people like Fannie Lou Hamer. I went down there with my dad as a 6-year-old. And I have always believed that I was accountable to those people, and that none of the freedom that we enjoy today would have been possible without the people in the rural South who stood up for civil rights at a time when they were literally risking their lives